Washington Square Park is always a good time. In the heart of Greenwich Village, in the midst of the NYU territory, Washington Square is great for people watching and animal watching. There's the dog run. Red-tailed hawks can be seen. There's a nest right up there in the corner at the top of the NYU library. Pigeon culture, gross. And more pigeon culture, not so gross. The fattest, most confident squirrels in the city. Aussies and Kiwis love squirrels. There are no squirrels in New Zealand or Australia, and if I saw a kangaroo, I'd be stoked. But fair warning, squirrels are just close cousins to rats, so don't touch them. Washington Square Park is very reminiscent of the folk music movement and the Beat generation, the hippies coming out here with their love-ins and demonstrations. This is still a major gathering point for protests and raising awareness. Billy Idol got arrested for smoking crack out here back in the 80s. David Lee Roth got in some drug trouble out here too, but Washington Square has seriously cleaned up its act since then. It's also used as a location for many TV shows and movies. Movies like When Harry Met Sally, Ghostbusters 2, I Am Legend, Searching for Bobby Fischer, Kids. I could go on forever, but as I'm sure you can guess, it wasn't always like this. Washington Square Park is first and foremost a graveyard, a potter's field. It's a massive burial ground for the yellow fever epidemics that occurred in the late 1700s here in New York City, and it was used as a burial ground until 1825. There's approximately 20,000 bodies buried underneath this park right here. So when they do renovations, they have to be very careful about how far down they dig because they will find human remains. This was also used as a training ground for volunteer militia and public executions. A gallows was set up right about here, and there are numerous accounts of hangings taking place. There's also Hangman's Elm, or the hanging tree. Amazing stories about criminals being strung up here for weeks at a time, showing what happens when you speak out against the establishment. Unfortunately, it's just not true. This land was originally property that was a farmland until it was bought up by the city in 1827. This is, however, arguably the oldest tree in Manhattan. The other candidate is the Dinosaur up in Washington Heights, where supposedly George Washington took shelter while observing the battle for Washington Heights. The only way to know which tree is older would be by cutting them down and counting the rings, which of course we would never do. This tree is well over 300 years old, and pretty amazing to have such old growth in such an urban atmosphere. And then, of course, there's the Washington Square Arch, one of New York City's most famous icons. It dates back to 1892, and it's here to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of George Washington's inauguration as our first president of the United States. Where are my history nerds at? Washington was inaugurated in 1789. How can this be here for the 100-year anniversary if it was built 103 years later? The answer, it's not the original arch. The original was built in 1889 and it was built out of wood and plaster. It was temporary, but the affluent people in the area liked it so much that they had a permanent one done by architect Stanford White. In the center of the arch is a temporary sculpture by artist Ai Weiwei and part of a citywide installation called Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. When you look through the archway and the sculpture, you can see this incredibly dynamic perspective, allowing you to see all the way up to Harlem up Fifth Avenue. That being Fifth Ave, you can trust that the Washington Square Arch was built for the benefit of the rich people up on Fifth Avenue, not for the working class down here in the village. So we've actually been looking at the back side of the arch. Let's go take a look at the front. Here in the front, you can see our two Georges that actually didn't show up until 1918. Here's General George Washington during wartime, and here's President George Washington during peace. It's certainly emulating the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. It's much smaller, but just like the Arc de Triomphe, we used to be able to go up to the rooftop. There's a spiral staircase in this column. 1917, group of radical liberal artists break in, barricade the doorway, get up to the rooftop. They release some balloons, light some lanterns, they cook food and actually set off cap guns. They tried to claim Washington Square as a new country. They called it the Independent Republic of New Bohemia, and it lasted for 2 hours. And they kind of ruined it for us, because nowadays, only on rare occasions do we have access inside the arch. But we can still enjoy the rest of the park, and now we know its secrets.